we will continue with the first session. Could I please invite the moderator for this session, Dr. Loy Keng Min, Deputy President of Transparency International Malaysia, to the stage, along with the speakers for this session, Shreya Basu, Regional Civil Society Coordinator for Asia Pacific Open Government Partnership, Antonio Acuna, Head of Data.gov.uk, and Yang Berbahagia Datuk Yasmin Mahmud, Chief Executive Officer of MDAC, to the stage, please.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first session of today's program. And I'm happy here to present to you three distinguished speakers. The first speaker is Ms. Shreya Basu from the Regional Civil Society Coordinator for the Asia Pacific Open Government Partnership. And she will be discussing about the Open Data Initiative and how it will promote the Open Government Partnership value. Our second speaker, as you will know, is Mr. Antonio Acuna from UK, Head of the Data Government UK, where he will be relying some of his experience in establishing this Data UK and how this data can be used to generate the business and improve the communication between the government, etc. None other than that is our third speaker, Yang Bahagia Datuk Yasmin Mahmud. She will be discussing about the Malaysian aspiration on the digital economic and how MDAC is working with the public and the private sector. Each speaker will be given probably about 10 minutes to present their viewpoint on this, and we're followed by the question and answer after the three speakers has been presenting their viewpoint. Of course, let me start off with Ms. Basu. Take it over from here.
Slides. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shreya Basu, and I'm from the Open Government Partnership Support Unit, which is the Secretariat for the Global Initiative. And I'll be talking a little bit about what the initiative actually is and how it's being used to advance open data initiatives and some of the global trends that we're seeing from participating countries. So the Open Government Partnership is basically a voluntary multi-stakeholder initiative that aims to push the envelope on transparency and accountability, but explicitly doing so by engaging civil society and citizens, and riding the wave of the opportunities that new technologies offer for increasing access to information, promoting better dialogue, and fostering accountability. OGP works in 5 simple steps. A country joins if it meets the eligibility criteria. Once it joins, then government and civil society work together in creating a national action plan, which the government then leads on implementing with support from civil society, but also being monitored by civil society in the process. Progress is also monitored through the OGP's independent reporting mechanism, which is the accountability mechanism of the initiative, and through self-assessments published by countries themselves. And throughout this process, governments and civil society contribute to peer learning, participate in high-impact conversations at the global, regional, and domestic levels, and are part of an international network to exchange effective approaches on OGP. The next slide. The action plan is really at the heart of OGP. The idea is that it's a co-created 2-year plan in which concrete commitments are laid out to advance OGP values of transparency, accountability, participation, and technological innovation, which is on the next slide. And the idea is that, moving on to the next slide, sorry about this, that each action plan must address at least 2 of the 5 grand challenges that OGP sets out, which you can see on the slide there, which includes improving public services, increasing public integrity, effectively managing public resources, so budgets, natural resources, aid, etc., creating safer communities, and increasing corporate accountability. In the process, OGP, of course, recognizes that different countries are at different starting points, so context is taken into account. So what was started by 8 founding countries in 2011 is now over 66 participating countries strong, including several from the Asia-Pacific region that you can see on the slide there, with more than 100 national action plans and over 2,000 commitments, quite a few of which have been completed and can be considered to be potentially transformative. So what do we know about how OGP is being used to advance open data initiatives? Go to the next slide. I think it's quite clear how how open data relates to OGP values on access to information, accountability, participation, innovation on technology, so I won't dwell much on that. If you look at this chart, which is from a paper we did earlier this year, you can clearly see that open data commitments are becoming increasingly popular. If you look at the countries in the chart, each one of them has either maintained their interest in open data, or it has increased over time through different action plan cycles. The only country that's seen a decline is Brazil, but that's only in relative terms. So in terms of absolute commitments on open data initiatives, that's been on the rise in Brazil too. So open data is increasingly becoming a theme amongst participating countries. It's not the only theme in OGP, but most certainly a significant one. So we wanted to find out a little bit more about what exactly these governments are committing to on open government. The next slide. We broke it into 4 different categories, which you can see on the next slide. The 4 categories are data supply. So that relates to the creation of technical platforms, like open government portals, open aid platforms, standards such as the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative and the International Aid Transparency Initiative standard, data use, supporting the demand for open data and working with private sector to exploit the potential of business potential that open data offers. And then another important one is context. And here we have countries like Moldova who've updated their right to information law to make sure that it covers government health data. And then we also looked at whether commitments were sector-specific or whole of government. So what's getting committed? In the orange are those that relate to data supply. So the creation of technical platforms or open government platforms are the most common open data commitments that you see. There's also machine readability and the adoption and implementation of data standards. There's also some in the green on supporting data use. So supporting intermediaries in using and interpreting the data and creating awareness, hackathons to understand what the data is and exploit its potential, creating public data, working with the private sector to use this open data. But what you see less often in the blue are the efforts to make sure that the legal context and the institutional environment matches the demand for open data. However, there is some evidence to show that countries, as they move through action plans, shift towards these context elements, so shift towards the policy and the regulatory requirements needed to align data supply and demand better beginning from a base of data supply. On the next slide, you'll see that about 30% of the open data commitments were sectoral. And on the next slide, you'll see that when these commitments are sectoral, most of them relate to budgets, followed by health, then natural resources, where the commitments are mostly on the extractive side. So there's more to be done on the environmental aspect of natural resources. Education, and then a number of other smaller areas. There are different countries that are in the process of releasing open data sets, but not all of them are high-value data sets. There are some good examples, though. On the next slide, you'll see that Ireland, New Zealand, South Korea, Moldova, they're all working on releasing high-value data sets, either in line with the G8 commitment on the Open Data Charter, or identifying priority data sets for business and civil society organizations. In South Korea, for example, 504 key public data sets were released under the OGP after consultation with the private sector and with citizens, and that's now being exploited for things like apps and other ways in which the private sector can realize the business potential of this government data. So I'll stop there in terms of throwing graphs and stats and global trends at you, and ask the question, so what? To what extent do open data commitments on OGP actually create an impact on transparency and accountability? And what can we do to get more robust commitments on open data and make those commitments more powerful, sorry. So the first is a complex question. What we know is that open data commitments are being implemented at roughly the same rate as other commitments in OGP. At the same time, we also know that commitments on open data are being potentially more impactful than the average OGP commitment, and we know this through the results of the independent reporting mechanism or the accountability mechanism of the Open Government Partnership. Of course, this only speaks to how much the commitments are affecting specific sectors or policy areas in specific contexts. So this isn't, it's not comparing country to country, but it's understanding the impact for each sector or each thematic area within countries. Judging how well the sum total of these open data commitments or an action plan has a micro impact or a macro impact on the country is a bigger question that we can answer today. While the Open Government Partnership is 4 years old or young, depending on how you'd like to phrase it. There's still more research that needs to be done on the broader impact issues, and this is an area that we're investing in. We know a couple of countries have moved from their first action plan, which emphasized infrastructure, to a second plan with growing emphasis on matching public demand with supply. So this goes to show that countries are using the OGP process to learn and to do more when it comes to open data. But we also know that too many governments are using the if you build it, they will come approach, hoping that they get lucky and citizens will use the data that's presented to them. And we often find that that's not the case. Access to information works, open data works, when it is usable, useful, and used. Open data commitments can be made really impactful by ensuring that where governance data is put out, it's actually open, both in terms of the legal requirements, but also in terms of the participatory forums that are then created, where members of the public and officials can actually apply the data to make government more effective, more efficient, and accountable. So what next for Malaysia? I think joining OGP would obviously be an obvious first step, and as His Royal Highness Tunku Abidin Muiz mentioned, Malaysia is not yet eligible, and there's more that needs to be done on access to information and on asset disclosure. But this is a journey that other countries have undertaken, and there are plenty of examples from this region and across the network where you can learn about how that transition can be made. I think OGP ultimately is a journey. There isn't an end process. There is no A-star, 5-star country on OGP, although we have strong leaders emerging in certain areas. But the idea really is for countries to learn from their own experiences, but also those of others. I think what OGP then also offers is an opportunity for collaboration, both across governments and civil society in Malaysia, but also across the international network. And finally, share stories of what's happening with open data and open government in Malaysia, even outside the partnership and the initiative, because open government is certainly not new to Malaysia. I'd like to end with a slide with some key links and resources that you can use to find out more about what's happening with open data under the OGP initiative. Quick shout out for the third bullet point, which is the OGP Explorer, which is a tool that allows you to look at every single commitment made by the 65 participating countries. And it's classified according to different thematic areas like open data, access to information. And you can really get a sense of what's being done under this initiative. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. I'll be around for the rest of the day. Thank you very much for this opportunity.